Lieutenant General Tôn Thất Đính was a retired officer who served in the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. He is best known as one of the key figures in the November 1963 coup that deposed and resulted in the assassination of Ngô Diem, the first president of the Republic of Vietnam. A favorite of the ruling Ngô family, Diem received rapid promotions ahead of officers who were regarded as being more capable. He converted to Roman Catholicism to curry favor with Diem, and headed the military wing of the Cần Lao Party, a secret Catholic organization that maintained the NGO's grip on power. At the age of 32, Diem became the youngest ever ARVN general and the commander of the Second Corps, but he was regarded as a dangerous, egotistical and impetuous figure with a weakness for alcohol and partying. In 1962, Diem was appointed commander of the Third Corps, which oversaw the region surrounding the capital Saigon. He was given the post because Diem regarded him as one of his most loyal officers. This position meant that Diem would be a critical factor in the success or failure of any coup. In late 1963, with Diem becoming increasingly unpopular, Diem's colleagues recruited him into a coup by playing on his ego. They convinced him to ask Diem for a cabinet post, knowing that the president was adamantly opposed to military officers serving as ministers and would chastise him. Diem promptly rebuffed Diem, who became upset and was lured into the plot. Diem and his brother and chief advisor Ngô Nha were aware of a coup plot, but did not know of Diem's involvement. Nha planned a fake coup of his own in an attempt to trap his opponents and generate positive publicity for his family's regime. He put Diem in charge of the fake coup, and the general promptly redeployed loyal units outside Saigon and rebel forces near the capital. On the 1st of November 1963, the rebels' actual coup proceeded, and the Ngô brothers were deposed and executed. After the coup, Diem became one of the 12 members of the Military Revolutionary Council, serving as the interior minister. However, the MRC lasted only 3 months before being ousted in a bloodless coup by General Nguyen Khan. Diem and his colleagues were put under house arrest by Khan and falsely accused of promoting a neutralist plot. The subsequent military trial collapsed. The generals were convicted of lax morality, but were eventually allowed to resume the military service, albeit in meaningless desk jobs. Following Khan's exile by another group of generals, Diem was appointed to command the First Corps in 1966 in order to put down the Buddhist uprising. But Prime Minister Nguyen Cao Kentucky disapproved of his reconciliatory policies. Kentucky launched a successful surprise attack against Diem, who fled, but was later captured and briefly imprisoned by Kentucky. After his release, Diem worked in the media and was elected to the Senate in 1967. He served in the upper house until the fall of Saigon in April 1975, when he fled Vietnam. Early years. A native of central Vietnam, Diem enlisted in the Vietnamese National Army of the French-backed state of Vietnam at Phu Bai in 1949 and trained as a paratrooper in France. He became a protégé of Ngô Diem, a younger brother of Prime Minister Diem. Cien, who unofficially controlled the region of central Vietnam near Hue, was impressed by what he considered to be an abundance of courage on the part of Diem. Within 6 years of enlisting in the military, Diem had risen to the rank of colonel and was made the inaugural commander of the newly formed 32nd Division based in Da Nang in the center of the country on the 1st of January 1955. Diem led the unit until November 1956, during which time it was renamed the 2nd Division. Diem deposed head of state Bao Tai in a fraudulent referendum in 1955 and proclaimed himself president of the newly created Republic of Vietnam. The VNA thus became the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. Born into a nominally Buddhist family, Thinh had converted to Catholicism in the hope of advancing his career. The change of religion was widely perceived to be a factor in his rapid promotion above more capable officers. A devout member of the Catholic minority, Diem dedicated the country to the Virgin Mary and heavily disenfranchised and disadvantaged the Buddhist majority. Thinh once described himself as fearless and arrogant, and Diem's adopted son, the president, was a lifelong bachelor. In August 1957, he was appointed commander of the 1st Division based in Hue, the old imperial capital and CN's base. Thinh served there for 1 year, until he became a 1-star general and received a wider-reaching command in August 1958, making him the youngest ever ARVN general. Thinh's favor among the Go family saw him appointed in 1958 to head the military wing of the CN Lao, the secret organization of Vietnamese Catholics loyal to the Go family that maintained the family's grip on power. Despite the high regard in which the Go family held him, Thinh had a poor reputation among his colleagues. Regarded by his peers as ambitious, vain and impulsive, he was known mainly for heavily drinking in Saigon's nightclubs, and the Central Intelligence Agency labeled him a basic opportunist. He was known for always wearing a paratrooper's uniform with a red beret at a steep angle, and being accompanied by a tall, uncommunicative Cambodian bodyguard. Senior Australian Army officer Ted Sarong, who worked with Thinh, called him a young punk with a gun, and dangerous. PFHLai Pagoda. In August 1958, Thinh was made the commander of the 2nd Corps, which oversaw the Central Highlands region mainly inhabited by indigenous tribes. He was based in the mountainous town of Pleiku and oversaw the surrounding region and the lowlands to the north of the capital of Saigon. This put him in control of the 5th, 22nd and 23rd Divisions, 1/3 of the divisions in the country. At the time, the CIA had been training Montagnard tribesmen under the Village Defense Program with the stated intention of resisting communist infiltration, but Thinh regarded it was an attempt to divide and conquer and undermine him. He estimated that 18,000 tribesmen had been armed, and said to Go Thinh and Hu, one of Diem's younger brothers and his chief advisor, that the Americans have put an army at my back. CIA agent Lucien Conin admitted years afterwards that Thinh's claim was correct, that Hu and Diem had no previous idea of what the Americans had been doing. Thinh wrote to Diem to complain that his units were being weakened by the policy of promoting officers for political reasons. Despite having been a beneficiary himself of this non-merit-based policy, the reorganization of the Corps boundaries in December 1962 created a 4th region. The entire region surrounding the capital, Saigon, came under the purview of the 3rd Corps, whereas the previous arrangements saw 2 corps controlling the regions to the north and south of the capital. As a key supporter of Diem, Thinh was named commander of the 3rd Corps, because the Go family trusted him to defend them in the face of any coup attempts. Under the 3rd Corps were the 5th and the 25th Divisions. In August 1963, Hu, who controlled the Special Forces and Secret Police, allowed Thinh to have a hand in planning raids against Buddhist dissidents who had been organizing at the PFHLai Pagoda, Saigon's largest. The raids involved the deployment of the 5th Division, based in the town of Bien Hoa on Saigon's northern outskirts, into the capital. Although the execution of the raids, which left hundreds dead, was primarily the responsibility of Colonel Le Quam Tung, the Special Forces head, Thinh privately took responsibility, stating to a journalist, "I have defeated Henry Cabot Lodge. He came here to stage a coup d'etat, but I, Untitled Chapter, have conquered him and saved the country." Quote, In the aftermath of the raids, Foreign Minister Vu Van Mu resigned in protest, shaved his head like a monk and sought to leave on a pilgrimage to India. Nhu ordered Thin to jail him. At the urging of another general, Thin put Mu under house arrest instead. During this period, Thin told a dinner guest that he had the pleasure of dining with a great national hero. When the guest asked Thin where the hero was, Thin said, "It is me," and claimed to have defeated the Americans. Thin's ego had been played upon by the Go brothers, who had themselves reiterated this point and paid him a large cash bonus after the Pagoda raids. In the heady times after the attacks, Thin had a somewhat incoherent debate with his American advisor, claiming he was without doubt the greatest general officer in the ARVN, the savior of Saigon, and soon he would be the top military man in the country. Quote, in a press conference after the raids, Thin claimed to have saved South Vietnam from Buddhists, communists and foreign adventurers, a euphemism for the United States. After being questioned sharply, Thin quickly became angry. Ray Herndon of United Press International asked him to name the country that he was referring to, but Thin dodged the question. Herndon lampooned him by saying that a national hero should be able to identify the national enemy, and asked him to call Madam Nhu, the de facto First Lady known for her anti-American comments, to get help in identifying the hostile country in question. After several reporters derisively laughed at these comments, Thin stormed out of the conference. Defection and coup. Embarrassed by the events at the press conference, Thin returned to the officers' mess at the Joint General Staff Headquarters. His colleagues, led by General Trn Van Thon, were plotting a coup against Diem because of the Buddhist crisis, and attempted to play on Thin's ego to convince him to join them. They knew that without Thin's assistance, a coup would be difficult as his forces dominated the region surrounding the capital. In a series of meetings, the other generals assured Thin that he was a national hero worthy of political authority, and claimed that Nhu had not realized how important he was in the future of the country. Thin's colleagues even bribed his soothsayer to predict his elevation to political power. The other generals told him that the people were dissatisfied with Diem's cabinet and that Vietnam needed dynamic young officers in politics, and that the presence would reverse the declining morale in the ARVN. They advised Thin to ask Diem to promote him to Interior Minister, Tuong Van Minh to Defense Minister, and Trn Van Minh to Education Minister. The other generals hoped that it would reject Thin and wound his pride. As a result, Thin and his fellow generals met Diem at the palace, where Thin asked the president to promote him to the post of Interior Minister. Diem bluntly chastised Thin in front of his colleagues, and ordered him out of Saigon to the Central Highlands resort town of Tarlac to rest. Thin felt humiliated and embarrassed, having promised his colleagues that he would be successful. The Go brothers had been alarmed by Thin's request, and put him under surveillance. Thin found out, further straining his relationship with the palace. Thin agreed to join the coup, although with his ambitious nature, the other officers were skeptical and planned to have him assassinated if he tried to switch sides. With Thin and the Go family's increasing focus on the political usage of the army, the military situation in the Third Corps deteriorated badly in the second half of 1963, as personnel were redeployed into the cities. In August, he moved a unit away from Ben Tueng, which had been portrayed as a model settlement in the strategic hamlet program that was supposed to isolate peasants into fortified villages to keep the Viet Cong out. While the unit was in Saigon cracking down on the Buddhists, the Communists overran Ben Tueng. A year earlier, the American media contingent had been invited to the opening ceremony of the settlement, which was supposed to be the flagship of the Hamlet program. As Thin spent most of October in the capital plotting instead of inspecting the countryside, the Communists began to systematically dismantle the strategic hamlets, plotting a fake coup. By mid-October, Diem and NHU knew of the coup plans, but did not know that Thin was firmly among them, although they were wary of him. NHU then decided to outwit the generals with a counterplot. The generals heard of this and decided to counteract him. The other generals were still suspicious of Thin, fearing he would betray them. Having discovered that NHU was trying to use him to trap them, and not sure which side he was really on, they promised to make him interior minister and offered other rewards if he helped to overthrow the Go brothers. As part of the general's plot, Thin sent Colonel Nguyinhuko, his deputy corps commander, to Mytho to talk to the 7th Division commander, Colonel Bui Thin Tham, and 2 regimental commanders, the armored unit commander, both subordinate to Tham, and the chief of Mytho province. Exhorting them to join the coup, he stated that all the generals were in the plot except the strongly loyalist Hein Van Cao, and that Thin would soon join. According to one account, Thin had intended that loyalists would report CO's activities to Diem and NHU so that it would give him an opportunity to orchestrate his stunt to ingratiate himself with the palace. NHU's agents soon reported CO's activities to the palace. When the Go brothers confronted Thin with what occurred in Mytho, Thin feigned astonishment at his deputy's behavior. He began crying and said, "This is my fault, because you have suspected me. I have not really gone to work for the last 15 days but have stayed at home because I was sad. But I am not against you. I was sad because I thought I was discredited with you. So Nguyinhuko profited from my absence to make trouble." Thin claimed to know nothing of CO's activities and vowed to have his deputy killed. NHU opposed this and stated that he wanted keep Co alive to catch the plotters, and tried to use Thin to this end. NHU ordered Thin and Tung, both of whom took their orders directly from the palace instead of the ARVN command, to plan a fake coup against the government. One objective was to trick dissidents into joining the false uprising so that they could be identified and eliminated. Another aim of the public relations stunt was to give a false impression of the strength of the regime. Codenamed Operation Bravo, the first stage of the scheme would involve some of Thin and Tung's loyalist soldiers, disguised as insurgents led by apparently renegade junior officers, faking a coup and vandalizing the capital. Tung would then announce the formation of a revolutionary government, consisting of opposition activists who had not consented to joining the new administration, while Diem and NHU would pretend to be on the run. During the orchestrated chaos of the first coup, the disguised loyalists would riot and in the ensuing mayhem, kill the leading coup plotters, such as Generals Min, Thon, Levan Kim and junior officers that were helping them. The loyalists and some of NHU's underworld connections would also kill some figures who were assisting the conspirators, such as the titular but relatively powerless Vice President Nguyen Ngoc Tho, CIA agent Lucien Conin, who was on assignment in Vietnam as a military advisor, and Ambassador Lodge. These would then be blamed on neutralist and pro-communist elements. A fake counter-coup was to follow, whereupon Tung's special forces, having left Saigon on the pretext of fighting communists, as well as Thin's regulars, would triumphantly re-enter Saigon to reaffirm the Diem regime. NHU would then exploit the scare to round up dissidents. Thin was put in charge of the fake coup and was allowed the additional control of the 7th Division based in Mytho, which was previously assigned to Diem loyalist Cao, who commanded the 4th Corps in the Mekong Delta. The reassignment of the 7th Division gave Thin and his 3rd Corps complete encirclement of Saigon, and would prevent Cao from storming the capital to save Diem as he had done during the coup attempt in 1960. NHU and Tung, however, were unaware that Thin was part of the real coup plot. Thin told Tung that the fake coup needed to employ an overwhelming amount of force. He said that tanks were required because armor is dangerous. In an attempt to outwit Tung, Thin claimed fresh troops were needed, opining, "If we move reserves into the city, the Americans will be angry. They'll complain that we're not fighting the war. So we must camouflage our plan by sending the special forces out of the country. That will deceive them." The Loyalists were unaware that Thin's real intention was to engulf Saigon with his rebel divisions and lock Tung's men in the countryside where they could not defend the president. Tung and the palace agreed to send all 4 Saigon-based Special Forces companies out of the capital on the 29th of October. Not trusting Ko, Diem put a Catholic loyalist Colonel Phat in command of the 7th Division on the 31st of October. According to tradition, Phat had to pay the Corps commander a courtesy visit before assuming control. Thin refused to see Phat and told him to come back on Friday at 1400, by which time the coup had already been scheduled to start. In the meantime, Thin had Thon sign a counter-order transferring command of the 7th Division to Ko. The next day, Ko took the division's incumbent officers prisoner and used the unit to block loyalists from storming the capital from the south. Diem's downfall. On the 1st of November 1963, the coup went ahead, with CAO's troops isolated in the far south and Tung's forces outside Saigon. Unable to rescue Diem from the rebel encirclement, Tung was called to the Joint General Staff headquarters at Tan Son NHT Air Base under the pretense of a routine meeting, and was seized and executed. Attempts by Diem and NHU to make contact with Thin were blocked by other generals who claimed that Thin was elsewhere. This led the Go brothers to think that Thin had been captured, still unaware that he had rebelled. The following morning, Thin was allowed to have the final word with Diem before the brothers were arrested, allowing him to prove his loyalty to the rebel cause. Thin subsequently shouted obscenities at the Go brothers. Thin alleged that NHU's contacts with the Communists and threats to make a peace deal with North Vietnam had motivated the coup. When Diem and NHU were shot dead by the arresting officers against the orders of the generals, Thin claimed he couldn't sleep that night. He boasted to the media that he and his troops were responsible for seizing broadcasting studios, the police headquarters, Tan Son NHT Air Base, and the release of hundreds of political prisoners such as monks and students. He also claimed that he led the successful siege on Gia Long Palace, although the 5th Division of Colonel Nguyen Van Chu had actually carried it out. Thin saved the life of Colonel Cao Van Veen, the commander of the Airborne Brigade, who was a Diem loyalist. Veen's fate had been discussed during the planning phase. Thin, who played mahjong with Veen's wife, convinced Min to spare the paratroop commander, saying that Veen would not oppose the coup. At the JGS meeting, Veen, who had not known of the plot, removed his insignia and resigned, and was arrested for refusing to join the coup. Veen was allowed to return to his command a month later, and later became the chief of JGS for 8 years. Post-Diem. Following the coup, a military revolutionary council was formed, comprising 12 generals including Thin, each of whom had equal voting power. They appointed a cabinet mainly consisting of civilians led by Prime Minister Nguyen Ngoc Tho, who had been the titular vice president under Diem. Thinh was initially made Interior Minister, but though was said to have personally opposed the appointment, eventually Minh, the head of the military junta, struck a compromise whereby Thinh was made Security Minister and Administrative Affairs, which partially covered the Interior Ministry. He was the second deputy chairman of the MRC behind Minh and Thon. However, tension persisted as Th's civilian government was plagued by infighting. According to Th's assistant, Nguyen Ngoc Quy, the presence of Thon and Thinh in both the civilian cabinet and the MRC paralyzed the governance process. Thinh and Thon were subordinate to Tho in the civilian government, but as members of the MRC they were superior to him. When Tho gave a cabinet order with which the generals disagreed, they went to the MRC and gave a counter-order. Thinh and the new National Police Chief, General Shan, were accused of arresting people en masse, before releasing them in return for bribes and pledges of loyalty. The junta performed indecisively and was heavily criticized, especially Minh, who was viewed as being too apathetic towards his country's situation. During the MRC's tenure, South Vietnam suffered more and more losses to the Viet Cong policies. Thinh was reported to have celebrated his new positions by making conspicuous appearances at Saigon nightclubs and dancing, having lifted Madame Nhu's bans on such activities. He reportedly kissed the bar dances and ordered champagne for all present. Thinh's brash behavior caused public relations problems for the junta. In interviews with The Washington Post and The New York Times, he claimed that he took a leading role in the coup because we would have lost the war under Diem, and saying that he participated not for personal ambition, but for the population, the people, and to get rid of Nhu. He claimed to have been the specialist, gave the orders in only 30 minutes, keeping the plans all in his head. In an exclusive interview with Herndon, he said, "You're the one who started it all, who drove me into making the coup. You're the hero of the revolution." Quote. This was a reference to Herndon's sarcastic reference to Thinh as a great national hero after the general took credit for the pagoda raids. He also courted controversy with anti-American remarks, stating on August 21, "I was governor of Saigon and loyal to Diem." On November 1, "I was governor of Saigon and fighting Diem. Maybe in the future I'll be governor of Saigon and fighting against the Americans." Thinh and the leading generals in the MRC also had a secret plan to end the communist insurgency, which called itself the National Liberation Front and claimed to be independent of the government of North Vietnam. They claimed that most of them were first and foremost Southern nationalists opposed to foreign military intervention and U.S. involvement and support of Diem. The generals agreed with this viewpoint and thought that an agreement to end the war within South Vietnam was possible. The government also rebuffed American proposals to bomb North Vietnam on the grounds that such actions would cede the moral high ground, which they claimed on the basis of fighting in a purely defensive manner. However, the plans to bring the NLF into the mainstream were never implemented to any degree before the government was deposed. During his time on the MRC, Thinh persistently raised eyebrows with his volatile behavior. The Americans and his colleagues found him difficult to control. General Paul Harkins, the head of the U.S. military presence in Vietnam, advised Thinh to relinquish his control of the Third Corps on the grounds that he was already serving as the Interior Minister and that a corps needed a full-time leader. But Thinh refused. As the Third Corps surrounded the capital, the most economically productive region in South Vietnam, it had the most scope for corruption and graft. Thinh told U.S. Embassy officials in December 1963 he was preparing to accommodate himself to a neutralist solution for Vietnam. This reportedly perturbed the Americans and was interpreted as a threat to not cooperate with the anti-communist struggle if his power was wound back. U.S. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara criticized the arrangement, and in early January 1964, Thin was relieved by General Diem, who had been the head of the armed forces until being demoted after the coup against Diem, and he set about overthrowing the MRC.